In the village of Xiaogang in Anhui, student groups from local technical colleges are on an educational visit to one of the places where China's reform movement began 40 years ago. But back then, most universities and colleges had been closed down by the upheavals of the Cultural Revolution.
So what has brought you here to Xiaogang? Why have you come?
因为这是我们中国改革开放40周年，我们想借此这个机会来到那个当年中国改革开放第一村来，实地走访一下，了解当年的情况。
And the difference in the 40 years is just huge, isn't it?
In 1970, there were only 48,000 people in higher education in China.
Deng Xiaoping will be very proud of you.
Today, the figure is 36 million. It's an astonishing turnaround. So how did China do it?
Thank you.
In traditional China, education was the priority for state, family, and individual. Not only the path to preferment, it was the key to an ordered and moral society. The best people were chosen by sitting state-sponsored examinations. To come first in the national exams was a matter of civic pride. And here in Suzhou, there's a temple to the god of education with a very special honors board.
This gives you an idea of how seriously the Chinese took the examination system. This is a list of the 51 scholars just from the town of Suzhou here who got top marks in the imperial examinations between the 9th century and the 1870s. And the local guidebook says that Suzhou has had a galaxy of culture and scholars, so this temple was well worshipped in olden days.
That reverence for exams survived the end of the empire in 1911. The old system of learning was passed on to new universities set up on the Western model, and then on to the People's Republic. But in the 1960s, in the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, most universities were closed down.
When I finished my high school, I went to a factory in Shanghai. I did not have any hope to enter university.
A whole generation of young people was sent to the countryside for what was called re-education.
全国有1600多万中学毕业生到了农村去做农民。
I was the probably last cohort of people from high school that have to go to the countryside to receive re-education. I was thinking of my life was just, I'm stay there for my lifetime. Just going to be in that village.
By the time the Cultural Revolution ended in 1976, the education system had collapsed. For China's new leader, Deng Xiaoping, this above all needed urgent action if education was to be the motor of reform.
而现代化就需要人才，这个时候国家最缺的就是人才。所以邓小平恢复工作之后，他首先提出要分管教育和科技工作。他认识到了教育和科技的极端重要性，他很快决定恢复高等教育的招生考试。
In summer 1977, Deng held an education conference. He was anxious for the exams to restart as soon as possible.
When the news announced that actually we can take the examination to get into college, we were just so happy and it was exhilarated. It's just such a life-changing sort of moment for us.
The conference delegates told Deng that the exams should be free, fair, and open to all. He agreed. The date was scheduled before the end of the year, and the response was overwhelming.
was very tough. 5.7 million candidates applying for the exam. Only less than 5% were admitted. And ages varied from 18 to 35, in my class. I was 20 at that time. They were coal miners, they were farmers, they were soldiers, they were workers, young apprentices like me. So that exam changed the life of many people.
For a culture that for so long had believed in the value of education, it was a watershed moment.
When Deng Xiaoping made a new push for science and technological development as an engine for China's growth, he let the students go overseas again. He let the American universities back in.
In the 20 years after 1978, well over 200,000 Chinese students went to the US.
I remember, I think it's Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, asked them, how many students you want to send to the United States. Then said, how many you can receive. For us, no limit. So it's a lot of courage, because at that time, living standard between China and the West was so different. China was much lower, and many were concerned that students may not choose to return to China. And Deng said at internal party meetings that if 1 out of 10 can return to China, this policy will be a victory for us.
In the UK, one of the University of Kent's alumni would become China's ambassador in London.
China was so eager to send more people abroad. We were asked, two of us would share one scholarship. I kept my food cost at £1 a day. So I could buy book and have the luxury of half a pint of a beer in the students' bar once a month. I could feel the strong wind of change. The Chinese, many people like me, started to face the world and rediscover the world and also to learn from the world.
And so, as Deng had hoped, the student generation who went abroad are now coming home to work for the next phase of the reform and opening up.
We've sent, as of late last year, over 5 million Chinese students across the border to the West to pursue degree programs. And by this time, more than 3 million have returned to China.
I spent 16 years in the United States to get my degree and to work at a university for several years. The reason that I came back to Shenzhen is I like the resources and opportunity it provides to all kinds of people who have a dream to achieve something.
40 years on, China is now the most popular university destination in all of Asia.
China has been able to place a number of its universities in the top 100 in a short amount of time. But the question is, will this stay there?
The answer to that question, for Chinese educationalists, is for their universities to break away from traditional learning and to develop new kinds of curricula.
In China, we have about 3,000 universities and colleges. If you look at these universities from a distance, they are more or less the same, meaning they are crafted, their curriculum training is crafted along, from a single mold, if you will. So that we think many of us in China and in the world believe is one of the key reasons why innovation hasn't been commensurate with the wisdom of the Chinese.
The problem is that in today's China, university exams are still based on traditional forms of learning.
Students in China have to pass the college entrance examination, so they have to prepare for more than 10 years maybe, and they have to work hard to get the famous university.
How many hours a day when you were at school did you work?
Maybe like more than 12 hours. Yeah.
More than 12?
Yeah.
To change that mindset will involve an almost civilizational shift from the way China has always thought about education.
The imperial examination system is that you have to remember the great classicals and then to recite them and interpret them and so on. But the other group of thought was saying, we need to provide them not just a fish, but rather to teach them how to fish, how to broaden their intellectual horizon, provide them with how to think critically, creatively. And so these two schools of thoughts, always having to fight.
And how the tension between those two schools of thought is resolved will be crucial to the next phase of China's opening up.
Basically, people are saying the university education should really broaden particularly the humanity and social science. And how do you have a liberal art education? We're trying to find the new ways to transform to the university of the fourth industrial revolution.
A symbol of that is the new university now being built at Hangzhou, Westlake.
这是将来的一栋教工的宿舍。
Westlake University is attracting the best talents back from abroad to teach the next generation.
Westlake University, I think, is a bridge from the 4 decades of reform and opening up policy to the future. We are trying our best to perpetuate the spirit of China's reform and opening up policy. For someone like myself, raised in China, educated in professional school in the United States, I think we ought to be able to combine the strength of both cultural background and perhaps create a new type of university that serves China and the world in a much better way.
Debates about education have been central to the story of China's modernization, not just in the last 40 years, but over the last 150. And now, in the 21st century, a new future is opening up.